In the opening months of 1879, a clash erupted on the rolling plains of southern Africa that would become one of the most dramatic and tragic conflicts of the Victorian age. It was a war born not only of empire and ambition, but of cultural misunderstanding and political arrogance. The Anglo-Zulu War was a struggle between one of the most disciplined, indigenous militaries in Africa and the most powerful empire of the 19th century. It would yield both shocking defeats and hard-fought victories, searing itself into memory through names like Isandlwana, Rorke, and Ulundi. The Zulu Kingdom had been forged less than a century earlier by the legendary Shaka Kasanzanga, who transformed a small clan into a formidable military machine. His disciplined regiments, the Implis, wielded the short stabbing spear the Isandlwana, fought with a ruthlessness that carved out a state feared across southern Africa. By 1879, Shaka's successors ruled over a kingdom still proud and militarily capable, though increasingly pressured by European encroachment. Cetshwayo Kampande, the reigning king, was cautious but resolute. Determined to defend his people's sovereignty against British demands, the British, meanwhile, were driven by the imperial ambitions of Sir Henry Bartle Frere, the High Commissioner for Southern Africa. London had not ordered war, but Frere believed that the independent Zulu Kingdom was an obstacle to confederation, his dream of uniting South Africa under British control. In December 1878, he delivered an ultimatum to Cetshwayo: disband the Zulu military system, allow British oversight, and accept humiliating terms that struck at the heart of Zulu independence. Cetshwayo, recognizing the dishonor and impossibility of such demands, refused. The path to war was set. On January 11, 1879, British columns crossed the Buffalo River into Zululand. The red-coated infantry, cavalry, and artillery marched under the command of Lord Chelmsford, confident in the superiority of British discipline and modern weaponry. Yet the land they entered was no ordinary battleground. The hills of Natal and the broad grasslands of Zululand belonged to the Zulus. For generations, they had lived, farmed, and fought there. Villages of rondavels dotted the valleys, herds of cattle moved across the veldt, and warriors gathered in regimental kraals, ready to fight under the white shields of their ancestors. The British strategy was bold but flawed. Chelmsford split his forces, underestimating the mobility of the Zulu army. On January 22, 1879, near the mountain of Isandlwana, disaster struck. 20,000 Zulu warriors descended upon a camp of 1,800 British soldiers and African auxiliaries. The Zulu impis moved with terrifying speed, executing the classic horns of the buffalo formation, encircling their enemy in a sweeping motion. Despite Martini Henry rifles and artillery, the British lines crumbled. Ammunition ran short, officers fell, and the camp dissolved into chaos. By the day's end, over 1,300 British soldiers lay dead, their bodies scattered across the plain. One observer later wrote, "The field was white with their bones." It was one of the worst defeats ever suffered by the British Army at the hands of indigenous forces. Yet, even as the sun set on Isandlwana, another drama was unfolding just miles away at a small mission station called Rorke. There, 150 British soldiers, many sick and wounded, faced an onslaught of 4,000 Zulu warriors behind hastily built barricades of mealie bags and biscuit boxes. The defenders fought hour after hour, firing volley after volley into the advancing ranks. The night was lit by musket flashes and burning thatch. For 12 hours, the battle raged. When dawn broke, the Zulus withdrew, leaving hundreds of their dead around the mission. Astonishingly, the British had held 11 Victoria Crosses, Britain's highest award for valour, were awarded to the defenders more than in any single engagement in history. The war dragged on for months. Reinforcements arrived from across the Empire, troops from Britain, the Cape Colony, and beyond. The British adapted, using fortified lagers, improved supply lines, and coordinated attacks. Cetewayo, though reluctant to push for outright invasion, continued to resist. The Zulu warriors remained fearless, but their losses mounted. At Gingandlavu and Kambula, the British inflicted heavy defeats. Finally, in July 1879, the campaign reached its climax at the Battle of Ulundi. Here, on the open plain near the Royal Kraal, 20,000 Zulu warriors faced a British square of 5,000 infantry, cavalry, and artillery. The Zulus charged with unbroken courage, their war cries echoing across the veldt. But this time, discipline and firepower prevailed. With rifles, Gatling guns, and artillery, the British unleashed devastating volleys. Thousands of Zulus fell in the assault. The royal capital of Ulundi was burned, its huts and cattle enclosures set ablaze as the kingdom collapsed. Cetewayo was captured and sent into exile. The proud independence of the Zulu nation was extinguished. The aftermath was grim. The kingdom was partitioned, its authority shattered, and its people subjected to colonial rule. For the British public, the war was both triumph and tragedy. Isandlwana, a humiliation. Rorke stripped a tale of heroism. Ulundi, a victory that cemented imperial pride. But for the Zulu people, it was the end of sovereignty, a wound that would mark their history for generations. And yet, the Zulu legacy endured. Their courage, discipline, and defiance in the face of empire became legendary. Oral traditions preserved the memory of warriors who stood against the might of Britain. Songs, dances, and stories kept alive the spirit of resistance. Even today, the Anglo-Zulu War is remembered not merely as an episode of imperial conquest, but as a clash of two worlds, an African kingdom fighting to defend its land and traditions against the tide of empire. Modern historians, archaeologists, and descendants of both sides continue to visit the battlefields. At Isandlwana, white cairns mark where British soldiers fell, while stone memorials honor Zulu dead. The wind still whistles across the plains, carrying echoes of the battle cries and gunfire of 1879. Visitors walk the same ground, imagining the thunder of hooves, the clash of spears, the desperate volleys of rifle fire. The land itself remains the final witness to a war that reshaped southern Africa. The Anglo-Zulu War stands as a lesson in arrogance, resilience, and cultural encounter. It reminds us that history is never simple. One side's victory can be another's devastation, and courage is found on both sides of the line. It is a story of empire, but also of humanity, of men fighting and dying for their king, their people, and their way of life. As we look back on the events of 1879, we are reminded why history matters. To remember is to honor, and to honor is to learn. This documentary is part of that effort to keep alive the memory of those who fought, to tell their stories with truth and respect, and to ensure that their sacrifice is not forgotten. If you value the work that goes into bringing these stories to life through research, narration, and dedication to accuracy, consider supporting high-quality historical storytelling. It is through such efforts that the past remains vivid, and that we, in the present, may continue to bear witness to history.